Hello everyone, in this video today we're going to be going through the topic of the impairment of goodwill. So as I said in the video on the impairment of intangible assets other than goodwill, goodwill has its own impairment test, okay? So we have two impairment tests for other types of intangibles, and then we have also an impairment test for goodwill, okay? Before you've watched this video, you really need to watch the video about recording goodwill. That's the name of the topic that goes over first recording goodwill, because then later on in the life of goodwill we might have to record an impairment, okay? And I'll go over a little bit of stuff here, but it would be very helpful if you've seen that video to understand what's going on here, okay? So first, the impairment test for goodwill is different than other impairment tests and consists of two steps. So step one is to determine if goodwill is impaired. To determine if an impairment has occurred, a company compares the fair value of the reporting unit that contains goodwill to the carrying value of the reporting unit, including goodwill. Okay, so the first step that we do is that we take the overall fair value of the reporting unit and we just compare it to the overall carrying value of the reporting unit. Okay, and when it says including goodwill, this carrying value, the reason it says that is because later on we don't include the goodwill, but basically it's just saying compare fair value to carrying value. Okay, the reporting unit that contains goodwill is the unit a company purchased from another business, as goodwill is only recorded when purchasing another business. Again, as we talk about in the recording goodwill video, basically what happens is that companies will purchase another company, and that's when you record goodwill. When the acquiring company purchases, it's known as a target corporation, okay? When they purchase that target corporation, the acquiring company records goodwill, and they usually put that target company into a reporting unit, basically sort of just its own unit within the company, and they call it a reporting unit, okay? And so basically, so the reporting unit that contains goodwill is the unit a company purchased from another business, as goodwill is only recorded from purchasing another business, okay? So that's how that works. So basically, once we've done this comparison, if the fair value is greater than the carrying value, goodwill is not impaired. So if fair value is greater than carrying value, goodwill is not impaired. That should make sense because, you know, fair value is higher than carrying value. So basically, we're not impaired, right? Our carrying value is not like overstated, right? If it was overstated, that means fair value would be less than our carrying value, because fair value is a measure of what the market is right now, right? So if goodwill is not impaired, we do not perform step two. But if the fair value is less than the carrying value, goodwill is impaired, and if it's deemed impaired, we perform step two. Okay, fine. So if carrying value is less than fair value, we move on to step two. Okay, so step two is to determine the amount of the impairment. To determine the amount of the impairment, companies first compare the fair value of the reporting unit to the carrying value of the reporting unit, adjusted for changes in fair value, not including goodwill. Okay, so what we do in step two is that we take the fair value of the reporting unit, and then we subtract out the carrying value adjusted for changes in fair value, which we'll see what that means. But generally speaking, we subtract out the carrying value, which does not include goodwill. Okay, we take fair value and subtract out carrying value, the carrying value of every single asset and liability except for goodwill. Okay, and what that leaves us with is something called the implied value of goodwill. The implied value of goodwill. Okay, so it says subtracting the carrying value, not including the goodwill, from the fair value of the reporting unit yields the implied value of the goodwill, which is basically the fair value of the goodwill. Okay, so again, if you were to say, okay, let's take the total fair value of this unit and let's subtract away everything except for the carrying value of the goodwill, the only thing left over at that point is the value of the goodwill, right? That would be the fair value of the goodwill, okay? Because we're taking out all the carrying values of everything else other than goodwill, okay? And so the only thing we're left over with is the implied value of goodwill, which is the fair value of the goodwill. So finally, once we have fair value of goodwill, a company subtracts the carrying value of the goodwill from the fair value of the goodwill to determine the impairment loss. The impairment loss is carrying value of goodwill minus the implied value of the goodwill or the fair value, okay? We will see quite a few examples of this in just a minute if that doesn't make sense. So let's just go ahead and jump into some examples. Let's make sure we have both of these papers lined up here. It looks pretty good. All right. So we're just going to go through a basic example. Again, this is a very quick example just to get our feet wet, and then we're going to go through some other ones. So on January 1st of 2014, XYZ company acquired ABC company in a business combination. XYZ recorded goodwill of $600,000 from the purchase of ABC. ABC became a division of XYZ at this time. During 2014 through 2017, ABC experienced substantial loss, and at December 31 of 2017, XYZ believed that the goodwill of ABC division may be impaired. At December 31 of 2017, the fair value of the ABC division was $5 million, and the carrying value, including goodwill, was $4.5 million. Okay, so basically, it tells us that the fair value is $5 million, and the carrying value, including goodwill, is $4.5 million. Okay, so it says, prepare the journal entry to record the impairment of goodwill. If no entry is necessary, write no entry. So again, there's a lot of information in this problem. It's kind of just giving you a bunch of background information. We don't really need a lot of this information in this problem, but let's see. So step one is to compare the fair value. Compare the fair value of the reporting unit that contains goodwill to the carrying value of the reporting unit, including goodwill. Okay, that means the overall fair value to the overall carrying value. The overall fair value is $5 million. The overall carrying value is $4.5 million. Okay, so we compare $5 million to $4.5 million, and we see that the fair value exceeds the carrying value, including goodwill, so no impairment has occurred. So we do not perform step 2. Our answer is no entry. Okay, so again, if the fair value is greater than the carrying value, goodwill is not impaired. We do not perform step 2. Okay, so if the fair value is greater than the carrying value of the reporting unit, including goodwill, okay, again, including goodwill, then we have no impairment. Okay, what that means, including goodwill, is that the carrying value of everything except for goodwill would be $3.9 million, right? And then if we add in goodwill, we'll have $4.5 million, right? So it's the carrying value of everything, including goodwill. Again, the reason we're using that terminology is because at the bottom here, if we did have an impairment test, we would have to take out goodwill and just use $3.9 million for one of our calculations. Okay, but for this basic example, we don't have an impairment, and so we're good to go on that one. Okay, now let's assume we have the exact same facts as above, except for now the fair value of the division is $4 million. Okay, so we have fair value of $4 million. It told us that our carrying value was $4.5 million. Okay, we could flip back to that really quickly. Carrying value, including goodwill, is $4.5 million. And remember, our goodwill is $600,000. That's what it told us on the previous page. $600,000. Okay? So it says, prepare the journal entry to record the impairment of goodwill. If no entry is necessary, write no entry. Okay, so step 1, fair value of the division, $4 million. Carrying value of the division, including goodwill, $4.5 million. Okay, now we see fair value is less than carrying value, including goodwill, so impairment has occurred. We must perform step 2. Okay, in step 1, we did not have an impairment loss, so we did not perform step 2, right? But in this step, or in this scenario, we do have an impairment, so we must perform step 2. Okay. So now what we're going to do is that we're going to look, and basically what we're going to do is that we're going to compare the fair value of the division, $4 million, to the carrying value of the goodwill to the division, not including the goodwill. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to take the $4 million fair value, and we're going to subtract out the $3.9 million, which is the carrying value of the division less the goodwill, right? Because the carrying value of the division is $4.5 million in total, including goodwill. If we take out goodwill, we have $3.9 million of carrying value. Okay, then, okay, we can determine the implied value of the goodwill. Okay, so in this case, the implied value is $100,000, okay? Because what we're doing is we're saying, okay, let's subtract out everything except goodwill from this fair value, and that will give us the fair value of the goodwill. That's the only thing left, right? That's the only thing that could have value of left, okay? So that means that our implied value is $100,000, and again, the implied value, what that means is we want the asset on the books at $100,000, right? Because that's the actual value of the goodwill, right? We can't have it stated at something above that amount because then that's overstating our assets, okay? So what we have to do is we have to record an impairment loss. We have to do the carrying value of the goodwill less the implied value, okay? The carrying value was $600 initially. Now we only want it to be $100,000, which means we must record an impairment loss of $500,000. So loss and impairment $500,000, goodwill $500,000. Okay, that will reduce our goodwill carrying amount to exactly $100,000, okay, which is what we want because that's the implied value. That's the fair value of the goodwill, okay? So that is the second scenario. That was a little bit more complex than the first scenario. Now we're going to an advanced example, meaning that this example is actually going to be relatively challenging. Okay, there's a lot of different things going on here. I kind of just worked up to this example specifically because it's a little bit of a more challenging topic, and we want to just take baby steps kind of moving up to this example. Okay, so we've done 2 basic examples, one with no impairment, pretty straightforward. Second one with an impairment, a little bit more challenging. Now this one is sort of the whole enchilada. Okay, so on January 1st of 2014, XYZ Company acquired ABC Company in a business combination. XYZ recorded goodwill of $600,000 from the purchase of ABC. ABC became a division of XYZ. These are the same facts. It's just this, the top is the same, the bottom changes. During 2014 through 2017, ABC experienced substantial losses, and basically they believe goodwill may be impaired, blah, blah, blah. We're given all this information about ABC division as of December 31 of 2017. So then we're told a bunch of items, and we're told their carrying values, and we're told the total carrying value is $4.4 million, right? They're just taking add, subtract, because assets you would add, liabilities you would subtract, right, to get the actual carrying value. So you would have 100,000, 200,000, 4.2 million, 4.8 million, 4.7 million, 4.4 million. Okay. As of December 31 of 2017, the fair value of ABC division was $4 million. Additionally, all the assets and liabilities of ABC had the same fair values as their carrying values, except for equipment, whose fair value was 4.1. So the fair value of the equipment is actually 4.1 million. Okay, and then for the rest of the assets, they're the same as their carrying values. Okay, and we'll see that complicates our calculation a little bit in a minute. So again, prepare the journal entry to record the impairment of goodwill. If no entry is necessary, write no entry. Step 1. Compare the fair value of the division to the carrying value of the division, including goodwill. We see that the fair value is less than the carrying value, which again means that an impairment has occurred. So we must perform step 2. Right, again, fair value compared to carrying value, including goodwill. If fair value is less than carrying value, including goodwill, then we have an impairment. Okay? Step 2. Compare the fair value of the division to the carrying value of the division, not including goodwill. But again, we have to remember that there's this little thing in parentheses here. We have to adjust the carrying value for changes in fair value. So we have this change in fair value of our piece of equipment, right? So we actually need to adjust the carrying value of the division for that increase in fair value. The increase in fair value is what? $100,000, right? So it's a $100,000 increase in fair value. Okay, so we actually, when we're doing our calculation, we're going to have to include that $100,000 as well. So again, it's to determine the amount of the impairment, companies first compare the fair value of the reporting unit. Okay, the fair value is $4 million to the carrying value of the reporting unit, adjusted for changes in fair value, not including goodwill. Okay, so there's a couple things going on there. The first thing is that we need to take, so we have to take the carrying value of the division, not including goodwill. Okay, it's $3.9 million. How do we get that? Okay, we start with the carrying value. Okay, then we need to adjust for any changes in fair value, right? Adjusted for changes in fair value. So we start at 4.4 million. We add the $100,000 increase in fair value of the equipment. Okay, if the fair value is higher for an asset, we need to add that, right? Because that means that the asset is more valuable. Okay, if it was less, then we would subtract it on the asset side. Okay, and then on the liability side, it would be flipped, right? So in that case, if a liability was more, if the liability was like 200,000 or something, then we would subtract that, okay? And then if it was less, then we would add it, okay? But in this case, we have a relatively straightforward example. It's just the asset is worth more, so we have to add that because that means that the carrying value of the division is going up, right? If the asset was less, the carrying value of the division would be going down, and we can kind of use similar logic for the liability side, okay? Then again, we have to subtract out the goodwill because we're not including that in this part of the problem. Okay, so that's how we get it. 3.9 million. 4.4 million minus 100,000 minus 600,000 gives us 3.9 million. Okay, that means that the implied value of the goodwill is $100,000. Okay, it is. This should say 3.9 million. 4 million minus 3.9 million. Okay, $100,000. Again, it's kind of that same thing where we do fair value minus carrying value adjusted for changes to give us implied value. Okay, that's what we do. And so our implied value is $100,000. Okay, so our impairment loss is equal to the carrying value of the goodwill minus the implied value of the goodwill, which is the fair value. Okay, our carrying value was $600,000. It has not changed. Okay, that's the other thing too, is that the carrying value does not change for goodwill unless you actually record an impairment. Okay, we don't amortize goodwill. We don't do anything else with goodwill. The only time the value will change is one, when we're initially recording it, right? It goes up, we record it, but then in a business combination. And then if we impair it, then it goes down. Okay, so the carrying value is 600,000, the fair value is 100,000. We have to record a loss of 500,000. So we have loss on impairment, 500,000, goodwill, 500,000. Okay, so that is the end of this video. A little bit of a complex topic, went through 3 separate examples, so hopefully it should make sense. I know this was a word salad at the beginning, there's a lot going on there, but once we go through the problems, hopefully it's a little bit more clear about what we're doing. Okay, so that is the end of this video, and I hope that was helpful.